All right, thanks everybody for joining us. This is Setting Up Azure Resources, and I'm your host, Richard Knuckles. So, we left off last time. We had created a new resource group, and we'd gone over resource group properties and the initial set of blades we get with that. If you want to learn more about that, you can see my earlier videos. So now we jump back in to setting up our first actual service. Now that we have our resource group, we're here on the dashboard view of the Azure portal. We've logged in and we have our subscription set up and a resource group set up. You can see all of the things we have by going to the all resources list. You can see we've got no resources here. You can also add a new resource anywhere from any of the choices that you have from the all services blade here in the Azure portal. So we're going to start with one of the most common services used in Azure, the storage account. Storage accounts are big buckets of data storage accessible via website, APIs, and programmatically with software development kits. And these, we'll go over this in a minute. Let's go ahead and use our add service button here to create a new storage account. Like all services, you need to choose a resource group to add your new service to. You have the option here for the create new resource group at this point, which brings up a preview window to add in, create a resource group with a new name there, or you can choose an existing resource group. From the last video, we set up this resource group, and with this particular resource group or resource naming convention. Now, we also discussed naming conventions in the last video, and the storage account is one of the Azure services which only allows alphanumerics and all in lowercase. So we can still follow our naming convention, but we will not use the dashes. So naming convention goes region, project, environment, service type. So this is East US. We're going to add, this is a demo project. We are doing this for production. And we can call this storage store short. We've got two other pieces of the storage account naming convention. Put that up here. As you can see, we have the option for using both the service use case and a numeric identifier for this. If we are planning to use more than one storage account in this resource group, we might add in a suffix on this to indicate what the storage account is going to be used for. But in this case, we'll just leave this off here. So you've got two levels. We're going to choose the region here, and because we've already set this resource group up in the East US region, we can of course choose any other region to put this service in, including Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America. But we've already decided to use the East US region for this set of services that this resource group is going to contain, which is why we're prefixing them with the East US prefix. So we'll choose East US, which is the default here for the region for this storage account. We've got two levels of performance we can add for the storage account, standard and the premium. The premium is used only for virtual machine disks. So we'll want to leave that at standard so we can have the more widely used type there. There we go. Premium storage SSDs, and only used for Azure virtual machine disks, which we're not setting up at this point. We also have a couple of different types of accounts we can set up. The original version 1, new version 2, and blob storage. Version 1, version 2 don't have a lot of differences, but version 2 is recommended for new storage accounts being set up now. Blob storage is if you are only using this storage account for blobs, which would be large unstructured service or unstructured storage files like audio files, large binary data files, binary files, other types of text files that are large scale. Blob storage account type allows you to append to those blobs, those files, more easily. Storage v2 is a general purpose and highly useful in all those in general use. Locally redundant storage, we've got multiple types of replication that we can apply to a storage account depending on where in the US or where in your region you want to add backups, automatically managed backups to your files. So let me add an image to show you what I'm talking about here. Storage accounts, and the storage that backs them has 3 locally redundant sets of copies of the files that you're putting in. These are managed in the back end and totally invisible to your use on the front end, so you don't have to worry about managing these various copies or ever seeing these various copies. What you do get is a set of redundancies in case of outages and failures across your regions and the data centers that are backing your storage. With the other types of redundancies, we've got zone redundant storage, which copies not only the 3 in the local data center, but 3 more in another data center in the same region. We've got geo-redundant storage, which not only copies those that file 3 times in the local data center, but also in a data center in a separate region in the same global area. You can see from this image here that we've got an example of GRS and RAGRS, which gives you a copy of the files in, if the originals are in the East US 2 region, you can set up a copy for these in the West US 2, or if they're in the East US, you get them in the West US regions. So this Azure automatically makes these copies and keeps them synchronized through their internet backplanes, to make sure that the storage is backed up in case of an outage. Read access geo-redundant storage is the same as GRS, but it allows you to actually address those copies in the second data center so that you can add services in the second data center which have low latency access to copies of the files for really fast access in requests made to services in that region, and still manage the files in the primary region so that you have only a single place to manage them. Geo zone redundant storage does basically a combination of the zone redundant storage, which is in the same region, and the geo redundant storage, which is in a separate region. So you've got altogether 9 copies of every files, at least 2 in your local data center, or 3 in your local data center, 3 in the region, and an extra 3 in a separate region. When you use, so the base price for storage, for the storage account, is charged based on your local redundant storage. Adding redundancy in the zone, across zones, or in multiple regions like this increases the cost of the storage by double and triple. So if you have a good reason, or you need the assurance that you've got protection against regional outages in Azure for your storage accounts, then you can add redundant storage and you'll have access to those files in the event there is a regional outage and Microsoft declares a region is down. That's also the only way you can get access to the non-read access versions of these redundant storage files, is that Microsoft has to declare that the region is inaccessible and will not be brought back online in a reasonable time. The last thing we can configure here is the access tier. There are actually 3 access tiers for data stored in the storage account, specifically blob store service in the storage account: hot, cool, and cold. The cool tier is slower access and has a minimum storage period. The hot tier is fastest access, has the minimum latency for retrieving the files and updating the files, and no minimum period for storing the file. The archive tier uses an offline system for storing and is significantly cheaper than either the hot or the cool tier, but it also has a minimum retention period that you're going to pay for storage for those files, and also a high latency of up to several hours for accessing a file. So we'll keep this at hot for the purposes of this demo and for the most common use cases. You can switch to cool tiers on a file-by-file basis if you know you're going to keep those files for a long period of time. You can actually set this to cool at the beginning if you've determined that the usage of this storage account and blobs in this storage account are going to be as long-term backups or long-term retention, say backups that you're making of critical files on your computer, on your on-premise network, like database files, database backups, and other types of files that you need to keep long term. The only way to switch to the archive tier is on a file-by-file basis using the API command, the REST API, or programmatically through an SDK. So let's take a look at networking very briefly. It's one of the tabs here. You can select your connectivity methods if you have networks set up in Azure. This allows you to further secure access to your storage accounts to only the networks that you've set up. You would need to set up a VNet in Azure and IP addresses and access from your network, either via the Express Connect or a direct IP address to a VNet here. For this purposes, we will allow public endpoint access to these storage accounts, but that does not mean the files will be publicly accessible. You will still need to authenticate via one of the numerous methods for authentication to gain access to any of the files that are in here by default. Got a few other options we can set up here. We'll talk about Data Lake Storage Gen 2 in a later video, since that changes the way that you will work with blob storage and requires more discussion as to how it will be used and how you'll secure the files and structure the files for that. Secure transfer required means you need to have HTTPS connections for transferring files to blob storage, and encryption on your SMB connections if you're using file storage. We'll talk about blob storage and file storage here in a moment once we set this account up. Azure Files is a file share that you can set in here, and large file shares gives you the option for storing much larger files, as the name implies. Soft delete allows you to keep a snapshot of the blobs and requires you to programmatically or manually delete the files, hard delete the files, so that you prevent accidental deletions of files either in blob stores or the file shares. We went over tags in the last video. We'll say tags are a key value pair, and for the previous setup of the resource group, we added the author tag of Richard Knowles, that's me. So we'll add that tag here too at this point. And the last step is a review of the resource group, or the new storage account that we're setting up here, before actually creating it. Now we're ready to go. Here are all the settings that we've chosen, including the name, the resource group we're putting it in, and the subscription that we're using. Click create. This will take a few moments to create this storage account. This creation process creates a Azure Resource Manager template, an ARM template, and deploys it in the background via all of the Azure service backend services that handle managing the Azure services for you. Some services take a long time to set up. Some services are very fast to set up. Storage account has been created now. And from this screen, we can go directly to the resource. But if you wish, you can also go to the resource other ways. Nothing here on the dashboard. We'll cover dashboard in a later video. And here's the all resources blade in the Azure portal. And you can see now we have a storage account with this name in this resource group, particular resource, and pull up the overview blade of that resource.
Click subscribe to see more videos like this. If you liked this video, hit the like button. Leave a comment in the section below to let me know what videos you'd like to see in the future.